The Galactic Federation's Grand Archive on Xylos Prime was the largest repository of known intelligence in for spiral arms. Its crystal towers glowed with the accumulated data of 700 sentient species, each one carefully catalogued, cross-referenced, and stored for eternity. For the last 300 cycles, the archive's chief xenologist was a Vontelian named Zorik-65, a being of logical scales and a memory that never faltered. He had overseen the addition of 42 new spacefaring races, and he took great pride in his work. Every species had a clear entry, their first tool use, their first radio signal, their first warp jump, clean, precise, finished. Then came the human delegation. They arrived without announcement on a standard trading vessel. A small, scuffed ship that looked like it had been welded together from spare parts. The docking officer almost refused them entry. They were small, soft creatures, mostly water and anxiety, with no natural armor, no claws, no psychic ability. Their ambassador, a female named Alara Vance, wore a simple gray suit and carried a leather satchel. She did not bow, hiss, or emit pheromones. She simply smiled and said, "We'd like to see our file." Zorik-65 led them to the Hull of Young Races, a section reserved for species that had achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 50,000 cycles. Humans, according to his records, had only been interstellar for about 400 of their years. They were barely out of their solar system. Their file was thin, unremarkable. A few wars, some primitive art, a noted fondness for fermented grain. Zorik-65 had personally marked them as low threat, low potential. He opened the crystal terminal. The human file appeared in shimmering light. "Here," he said, his vocal synthesizer flat. "Species, Homo sapiens. Homeworld, Terra Sol 3. First radio emission, 12,000 cycles ago. First warp test, 410 cycles ago. Current status, member of the Federation, probationary class. Population, approximately 12 billion. Ambassador Vance read the screen. Her smile did not change. "That's wrong," she said. Zorik-65 scales flickered with irritation. "The archive does not make errors." "No," she agreed. "But your data does. You're missing about 99% of our history." The Vontelian felt a rare sensation curiosity. "Explain." Vance reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, flat object. It was black, cracked, and covered in faint gold lines. "This is a piece of a memory chip. It was manufactured on Earth 1.2 million years ago." The hall went silent. A few other archivists turned their eye stalks toward her. Zorik-65 made a sound like dry leaves crumbling. "Impossible. Your species has existed for less than 300,000 years. Your own fossil record proves it." "Our fossil record," Vance said, "is what we let you see." She placed the chip on the terminal's reader. The archive systems hesitated, then began to parse the ancient data. What unfolded on the crystal screen made Zorik-65 scales fall off in patches. The first image was a star map, not of the local cluster, but of the galactic core. Marked on it were 17 worlds, all with names in an ancient human dialect that predated their known writing systems. Next to each name was a date. The youngest date was 2 million years old. "You are not looking at a young species," Vance said quietly. "You are looking at a species that has already risen and fallen more times than your archive has recorded." She told him the story that no Federation species knew. Humans did not evolve in a straight line from apes to astronauts. They evolved, reached space, built empires, and then collapsed over and over again. Each time, they lost nearly everything. Each time, a handful of survivors crawled back into caves, forgot their past, and started over. Stone tools, fire, agriculture, industry, space, and then another fall. The first human spacefaring civilization, she explained, existed 3 million years ago. They had antimatter drives and genetic engineering. They seeded dozens of worlds. Then a gamma ray burst from a dying star, fried their electronics, and boiled their atmosphere. Less than 1,000 humans survived. They became hunter-gatherers again within 3 generations. The second civilization rose to million years ago. They were more advanced. They built artificial planets and learned to harvest energy from black holes. They lasted 60,000 years before a civil war involving self-replicating weapons turned their core worlds into radioactive glass. The survivors forgot how to read. They started over with sticks and stones. The third civilization, 800,000 years ago, nearly reached immortality. They uploaded their minds into crystalline lattice. Then a solar flare of unprecedented magnitude swept through the Sol system, scrambling every lattice. Billions of minds became static. The few biological humans left on Earth watched their gods die and invented new gods out of fear. And so it continued. The Bronze Age collapse that human historians thought was a regional crisis. It was the echo of a fallen orbital ring crashing into the Atlantic. The Dark Ages? A psychological trauma response to losing contact with a lunar colony that had been home to 2 million people. Every human myth, every legend of a great flood, a tower falling, a garden lost, these were not stories. They were broken memories of real events. Zorik65 watched the data scroll by. His logical mind tried to reject it, but the evidence was undeniable. Human artifacts had been found on dead worlds across the galaxy, but Federation archaeologists had always dismissed them as anomalies or misdated them by millions of years. They had assumed the primitive stone tools next to a quantum computer core were a hoax. They were not. They were the debris of a species that had died and been reborn more times than any other in galactic history. But why? Zorik65 finally asked. Why do you keep failing? Why don't you leave a warning for your future selves? Vance laughed. It was a soft, sad sound. We do, every time. We carve warnings into mountains, seal data vaults in salt caves, even tattoo messages into our own DNA. But 100,000 years of darkness erases everything. Mountains erode. Salt caves flood. DNA mutates. The warnings become myths. Myths become fairy tales. And then some clever child invents the wheel again, and the whole cycle repeats. Asterisk, she pointed at the screen. That chip you are reading? It came from a bunker buried under Antarctica. It was built by the fourth civilization. Inside, they left a simple message: do not trust the quiet. The sky remembers. We only found it 20 years ago. And we barely understood it until we developed quantum computing to decrypt the encryption the other archivists had gathered now. A tall, insectoid Crix scholar stepped forward. His mandibles clicked with disbelief. If what you say is true, your species should be extinct. No biological life can survive that many extinction events. Your genetic diversity would be zero. And yet, Vance said, here we are. She opened another file from her satchel. This one was biological. It showed the human genome, but not the standard version in the archive. This version had markers, thousands of them, that looked like garbage DNA to most scanners. But a closer analysis revealed their true purpose. They were adaptive switches. When humans faced a catastrophe, certain genes activated. Some increased radiation resistance. Others boosted neural plasticity. A few even allowed temporary hibernation for centuries. We don't just survive, Vance said. We evolve on demand. Every collapse makes us harder to kill. Every failure teaches our blood something new. The radiation of the first collapse gave us better DNA repair. The starvation of the second gave us more efficient metabolisms. The wars of the third gave us pattern recognition, so sharp we can see threats before they exist. She looked around the hall. You think humans are young and foolish. You think our loud music and messy emotions are signs of immaturity. But we are the oldest species in this room. We just have bad memory. Zorik65 felt something he had never felt before. Genuine fear. Not of human weapons or ships, but of their patience. A species that could fall from the stars, forget everything, and still crawl back to the stars again, not once, but dozens of times, was not a species to be dismissed. They were not survivors. They were a recurring event. How many times? He whispered. Vance pulled out a third object. It was a small, round stone with a hole through the middle. This is a bead. It was made by a human child 4.5 million years ago. She drilled the hole with a shark tooth and wore it on a string. We found it in a cave that had been sealed by a volcanic eruption. Next to her skeleton were the remains of a starship control panel. She held the bead up to the light. We don't know how many times we've risen and fallen. Maybe 20. Maybe 200. Every time we get close to the answer, something knocks us down. But here is the thing about humans, Zorik65. We don't need to remember the path. We only need to remember that there is a path. The Vontelian turned back to his terminal. He began to delete the old human file. It took him several minutes to craft a new one. When he was done, the entry read, Species, Homo sapiens, Homeworld, Terra Sol 3, First recorded emergence, unknown. possibly for 0.5 million years ago or earlier. Status: unclassifiable. Note: this species has achieved spaceflight at least 17 separate times. Each time, they lost the knowledge. Each time, they regained it. Their current interstellar period is the 18th. Do not assume it will be their last. Do not assume anything. He looked up at Ambassador Vance. What do you want from the Federation? She put the bead back in her satchel. We want you to stop treating us like children. We want access to the old data, the pre-Federation ruins on the Galactic Rim. We think some of them might be ours. And we want you to understand something. She stepped closer. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were ancient. When you look at a human, you see a 200-year-old mayfly. But we see a 40,000-generation-old mountain that has been ground to dust and built again. We are not your newest members. We are your oldest. We just forgot to bring our ID. For the first time in his long life, Zorik 65 had no data to process. No logical conclusion. He simply nodded. The human delegation left the hall. As they walked through the crystal corridors, a young Vontellian assistant whispered to Zorik 65, "Should we monitor them? Increase security." Zorik 65 looked at the new human file. Then he looked at the bead on the screen, a simple stone with a hole through it, made by a child who had lived when the galaxy was still young. "No," he said. "They have been monitoring themselves for longer than our species has existed. Let them be. And pray they never fully remember." Outside, Ambassador Vance stopped at the docking bay. She pulled out a small communicator and spoke into it. "Archive updated. They know about the cycles now. Phase 2 is approved." A voice on the other end crackled back. "How long until they ask about the other thing?" Vance looked up at the stars. Her smile returned, but this time it was different. It was not friendly. It was old. "Let them ask," she said. "But not yet. First, let them wonder how a species that keeps forgetting itself also keeps building ships capable of crossing the galaxy. Let them wonder where the design for our warp drive really came from. Let them wonder why our ancient languages have words for things that shouldn't have existed." She closed the communicator and walked into her ship. The last thing the docking bay cameras recorded was her voice, barely audible. "And let them wonder why, every time we rise again, we rise a little faster than the last time." The ship departed. The crystal towers of the Grand Archive glowed on, unchanged. But inside them, one file had been rewritten. And somewhere in the deep, dark space between galaxies, a very old signal, one that had been traveling for billions of years, finally reached its destination. It was a single word in a human language that no living being had ever spoken. It said, "Awaken." The story does not end with a question. It ends with a promise. Humans had not just existed for a long time. They had existed for so long that they had become part of the universe's immune system. And something out there, something old, something hungry, was about to learn why you do not poke a sleeping bear that has already died and gotten back up 18 times. Zorik 65 never slept well again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bead. A child's toy. A star pilot's grave. And a species that had turned forgetting into the greatest weapon of all, the ability to begin again, without the weight of the past. But with the scars of it carved into their very bones. That was the true horror and the true hope of humanity. They were not the strongest. They were not the smartest. But they were the only species in the galaxy that had learned how to lose everything and still show up for the next round, and they had been showing up for a very, very long time.